You know, people look at my career and they think everything was built on genius level math or some mysterious algorithm that only a handful of people could understand. But I'll tell you something far less glamorous, far less talked about, and yet far more important than any equation I ever wrote: self-discipline. If you can't control yourself, you'll never control your results. And today I want to walk you through 6 techniques that shaped my discipline, the same principles that helped me build Renaissance and stay focused through decades of noise, uncertainty, and temptation. When people talk about discipline, they usually start by talking about motivation. They think it's about getting fired up, staying inspired, or pushing yourself with emotional energy. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes like weather, and if your entire sense of discipline depends on it, you'll collapse the moment life becomes inconvenient. Real discipline starts with clarity, with knowing exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it. When your purpose is crystal clear, it stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like direction. Instead of dragging yourself forward, you feel pulled forward. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Think about how much harder it is to stay disciplined when you're unsure of what you're supposed to be doing. That feeling of waking up and thinking, what should I work on today, is one of the biggest killers of consistency. It leaves space for distraction, hesitation, and emotional decision-making. But when you start your day knowing exactly what problem you're trying to solve, your attention locks in almost automatically. That's how it was for me. My work wasn't just about making money. It was about solving a puzzle, understanding patterns, finding order in chaos. That purpose was so clear, it acted like an anchor. Even on days when I wasn't motivated, I still knew what I was chasing. Clarity also simplifies your priorities. When you're clear on your goal, you instantly know what belongs on your schedule and what doesn't. You stop saying yes to everything because you can finally see which actions move you forward and which ones only feel productive. Most people struggle with discipline not because they're lazy, but because they're working without a map. They're juggling tasks, commitments, and expectations without any real filter. But 1 hour of work with clear direction is worth more than 5 hours of work done in confusion. When you know your aim, you stop wasting effort on things that don't matter. Another powerful part of clarity is emotional stability. Uncertainty creates stress. When you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, your brain fills that gap with anxiety, procrastination, and overthinking. But when your path is defined, you experience less internal friction. You make decisions faster. You spend less energy debating with yourself. Discipline becomes less about forcing yourself and more about following a path you've already chosen. You reduce internal resistance, which means you can use your energy on actually doing the work instead of negotiating with yourself about whether you should start. Clarity also makes your habits stronger because it ties your daily actions to a meaningful outcome. If you tell yourself, I should read more, that's vague. It's easy to skip. But if your clarity says, I'm reading because I need to understand this system, solve this problem, or master this skill, suddenly the habit becomes purposeful. Your brain loves purpose. When it understands the why, it's far more willing to cooperate with the what. That's why people with strong purpose appear more disciplined. They're not fighting themselves all day. Their habits feel connected, not random. And clarity sharpens your focus because it eliminates the mental clutter that keeps most people stuck. Instead of trying to focus on 15 different things, you focus on one central pursuit. You stop trying to solve every problem at once. The mind works better when it's not divided into fragments. Clarity gives you a single point of concentration, and with that comes a deeper level of discipline almost automatically. You begin to enter work faster, stay with it longer, and return to it more easily after interruptions. There's also a quieter benefit to clarity: confidence. When you're clear on what you're doing, you stop doubting every step. You're not constantly questioning whether you're on the right path. That certainty fuels discipline because it removes hesitation. You commit fully instead of tentatively. Every action reinforces your belief that you're moving in the right direction, and that creates momentum. Momentum, once built, becomes one of the strongest forces supporting discipline. It keeps you going even when motivation isn't present, because now you're driven by motion, not emotion. All of this is why clarity is the foundation of discipline. Without clarity, discipline is just a battle of willpower, and willpower alone is a fragile thing. But with clarity, discipline becomes a natural extension of knowing where you're going and why it matters to you. It removes confusion, reduces emotional resistance, sharpens your focus, and gives structure to your actions, allowing you to move forward with consistency and purpose day after day. Regardless of how you feel in the moment, most people think self-discipline is about trying harder, forcing yourself, and pushing through weaknesses with sheer willpower. But that's one of the biggest misconceptions about discipline. The truth is, your environment will beat your willpower almost every time. Instead of trying to overpower your flaws, the smarter approach is to build systems that work with them. When you design your life around your natural tendencies, your discipline stops feeling like a fight and starts feeling like a flow. And that single shift can transform the way you work, think, and achieve. I learned early in my career that my strengths weren't the problem. My strengths would always take care of themselves. It was my weaknesses that had the power to derail me. My curiosity, for example, was a double-edged sword. It made me a strong researcher, but it also tempted me to wander endlessly into new ideas. If I tried to suppress that curiosity, I'd lose one of the most valuable parts of my personality. But if I allowed it to roam freely, I'd get lost in side quests and never move anything forward. So instead of trying to fix myself, I built a system around that flaw. I gave curiosity a schedule. There were hours for exploration, and hours where exploration wasn't allowed. It was a boundary, not a punishment, and that boundary kept me disciplined without draining me. That's the power of systems built around your weaknesses. They turn what used to be obstacles into something manageable and predictable. If you're easily distracted, you don't say, I'm going to concentrate harder. You restructure your environment so distractions can't reach you. If you have trouble starting work, you create a ritual that triggers focus automatically. If you procrastinate, you design shorter deadlines or break tasks into micro steps so small that your brain has nothing to resist. You stop relying on hope and start relying on design. Discipline becomes a matter of architecture, not effort. When you build systems this way, you also remove the shame that people attach to their own flaws. So many people believe their weaknesses are personal failures. They think being inconsistent or forgetful or disorganized means something is wrong with them. But often, it's just poor system design. If you forget things frequently, maybe you need a visual board or a structured planning system. If you can't stick to routines, maybe your routines are too rigid, too long, or too unrealistic. Your weaknesses aren't signs that you lack discipline. They're signals telling you what kind of system you need. Once you stop viewing your flaws emotionally and start viewing them functionally, discipline becomes a far lighter burden. There's another reason building systems works far better than forcing willpower. Systems reduce decision fatigue. The more decisions you have to make, the weaker your discipline becomes throughout the day. But when you have systems, a lot of your decisions are already made for you. You know when you work, how you work, what triggers the session, what tools you use, and what rules you follow. There's no mental debate, no negotiation, no internal tug-of-war. Systems eliminate the temptation to choose the easier path in the moment. They guide your actions automatically, even when you're tired or unmotivated. Designing your systems around your flaws also helps you stay consistent because it makes discipline sustainable. When people force willpower, they usually burn out. They push themselves intensely for a few days, then collapse because the system wasn't built for the long term. But when your system matches your personality, your energy, and your natural tendencies, it becomes something you can follow for years. You don't have to pretend to be someone else. You don't have to maintain a version of yourself that isn't real. You simply follow a structure that supports the way you already function. And the truth is, the most successful people in the world aren't the ones with the strongest willpower. They're the ones with the best systems. They don't rely on feeling disciplined. They rely on being prepared. They eliminate temptations instead of battling them. They automate important behaviors. They design routines that reduce friction. They anticipate their own weaknesses and build layers of support around them so those weaknesses lose their power. When you shift your mindset from I need to be stronger to I need better systems, self-discipline becomes far less painful and far more effective. You stop fighting yourself. You stop wasting energy trying to overcome traits that are simply part of who you are. You focus instead on shaping an environment that makes your success the natural outcome, not the uphill struggle. And once you experience that difference, You start to understand why true discipline isn't about force, it's about design. One of the most powerful lessons I learned throughout my career is that the mind is incredibly skilled at deceiving itself. We believe we're working harder than we really are. We believe we're being consistent when we're actually drifting. We believe we're improving when we're just repeating familiar patterns. And the only antidote to this self-deception is measurement. When you track what you do, when you let data reflect your behavior back to you, you no longer rely on vague impressions or optimistic memories. You see reality exactly as it is, not as you wish it were. That's why discipline without measurement almost always collapses. Without data, you're building your habits on illusion. I learned this deeply in my work. At Renaissance, we didn't make decisions based on feelings or theories or strong opinions. We made decisions based on data. The numbers didn't flatter us, they didn't comfort us, they didn't tell us stories. We learned to listen to what they actually said, and I realized the same principle applies to personal discipline. If you say you're going to work out, track it. If you say you're going to read, track it. If you promise to spend a certain number of hours learning, track it, not because tracking looks productive, but because it forces you to face the truth. Discipline grows when visibility increases. You can't manage what you refuse to measure. Most people avoid measurement because they're afraid of what it will reveal. They prefer the fog. The fog is comforting. It lets you believe you're doing pretty well, even when you're slipping. It lets you say, I'll get back on track soon, even when you haven't been on track for months. But the fog is exactly what weakens discipline. It gives you room to rationalize, to negotiate with yourself, to turn excuses into beliefs. Measurement clears the fog. It shines a bright, unforgiving light on your habits. And as uncomfortable as that may be at first, it's the only way to build lasting discipline. When you start measuring your actions, you learn something surprising. Data makes discipline easier, not harder. It gives you proof that your efforts matter. It shows you patterns you didn't notice. You begin to see that certain times of day are more productive, certain habits help you stay consistent, and certain distractions pull you off course more often than you realized. Suddenly, discipline becomes less mysterious. It becomes predictable. You understand the mechanics of your own behavior. You can adjust and adapt with precision instead of guessing. Another reason measurement is so powerful is because it generates momentum. When you track your progress, even in small doses, you get a sense of accumulation. You see the chain of days you've stayed committed. You see the hours you've invested. You see the improvement happening in real numbers. And the human brain responds strongly to visible progress. The more you see yourself advance, the more you want to continue advancing. This is why people stick to fitness apps, writing trackers, study logs, or habit journals. They're not just tracking behavior, they're tracking identity. The more consistent the data becomes, the more you start seeing yourself as a disciplined person. Measurement also removes emotional volatility from the equation. Without data, your self-assessment depends on how you feel. On a good day, you might think you're doing great. On a bad day, you might think you're failing. But the numbers don't care about moods. They don't exaggerate success or magnify failure. They give you a stable anchor for feedback. You don't have to wonder whether you're making progress. You can see it. You don't have to guess whether you're slipping. You can see that too. And when the guesswork is gone, discipline becomes grounded, not emotional. Another subtle benefit of measurement is accountability. Even if no one else sees the data, you're accountable to yourself in a way that's hard to ignore. It's like having a mirror for your habits. You might not like everything you see, but the honesty pushes you to improve. And improvement built on truth is always more reliable than improvement built on hope. In the end, measurement turns discipline from a vague aspiration into a concrete process. It gives structure to your efforts, clarity to your progress, and honesty to your habits. It eliminates the illusions that weaken discipline and replaces them with evidence that strengthens it. When you let data guide you, you stop relying on memory, mood, or motivation. You rely on reality. And reality, even when it's uncomfortable, is the foundation every strong discipline system is built on. Most people believe that becoming more disciplined means adding more to their life. More rules, more tasks, more commitments, more pressure. They think the path to discipline is paved with intensity and complexity. But the truth is almost the opposite. Discipline grows strongest in simplicity. When you strip away the unnecessary, when you remove the noise, when you stop packing your day with things that don't matter, you create the space and mental clarity needed for focus. Subtraction is one of the most underrated tools for building discipline, yet it's the one we resist the most because we're conditioned to believe that doing more means being better. What I learned over the years is that clutter, mental, emotional, or physical, is the enemy of consistency. Clutter creates distraction. It fragments your attention. It invites you to react instead of direct. When your life is filled with endless obligations, constant notifications, scattered tools, and unclear priorities, it becomes almost impossible to stay disciplined, no matter how hard you try. Your mind gets stretched thin across too many fronts, and in that scattered state, discipline feels like a battle. But when you start subtracting what doesn't serve you, discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a natural consequence of having fewer competing forces in your life. Subtraction also makes decisions easier. Most people burn enormous amounts of discipline, not on doing the work, but on deciding what to do. Decision fatigue drains the willpower you need to stay consistent. But when you simplify your environment and your commitments, your choices become obvious. If you have 3 major priorities instead of 12, you don't have to debate with yourself. If your workspace is clean instead of cluttered, you sit down and focus instead of reorganizing. If your schedule has open space instead of being crammed minute to minute, you create room for deep work rather than squeezing tasks between interruptions. Simplicity removes the friction that usually makes discipline feel heavy. Another powerful aspect of subtraction is emotional clarity. People underestimate how much emotional weight comes from doing things they don't actually care about. Every unnecessary commitment adds a layer of stress. Every irrelevant goal steals a little bit of energy. Every activity that feels obligatory rather than meaningful drains you in small, quiet ways. And discipline hates emotional exhaustion. When you subtract those obligations and the guilt tied to them, you feel lighter. You regain mental bandwidth. You begin to invest your energy in the things that truly matter. Your discipline strengthens because you're no longer carrying unnecessary emotional baggage. Subtraction also sharpens your sense of purpose. When you remove everything that isn't essential, what's left becomes incredibly clear. The fewer distractions you have, the more obvious your real priorities become. And when your priorities are obvious, discipline becomes almost instinctive. You know what to say yes to. You know what to ignore. You know what moves the needle. It's much easier to commit deeply to a few meaningful things than to scatter yourself across a long list of shallow ones. Even in my work, I saw how simplification created breakthroughs. Some of our most powerful models weren't the most complicated, they were the cleanest. The same applies to personal life. The simpler the structure, the more consistently you can follow it. Complexity collapses under stress. Simplicity survives it. Subtraction isn't about doing less for the sake of laziness. It's about clearing the path so discipline can flow naturally. It's about removing the obstacles you created without realizing it. It's about giving yourself fewer decisions, fewer distractions, fewer drains on your energy. When you subtract the unnecessary, discipline becomes far easier to sustain. What remains is focus, clarity, and the quiet strength to show up consistently day after day, without feeling overwhelmed by everything that once stood in the way. One of the most overlooked truths about self-discipline is that most people don't fail because they lack willpower. They fail because their environment is too tempting, too chaotic, or too convenient in all the wrong ways. We like to think of ourselves as strong, rational creatures capable of resisting anything. But in reality, we're shaped far more by our surroundings than by our intentions. That's why one of the most effective techniques for building discipline is designing boundaries that make distraction difficult and focus almost effortless. Instead of relying on willpower to fight off temptations, you structure your environment so those temptations lose their reach. Think about how much energy you waste every day resisting things you could have removed from your environment in the first place. The phone that's always buzzing, the tabs left open on your computer, the people who interrupt without realizing it, the workspace that blends relaxation and work so the brain doesn't know how to behave. Every one of these elements slowly chips away at your discipline because they create constant micro-distractions. Each one requires you to say no, even if only for a second. But those seconds add up, and by the end of the day, your willpower is drained not from the work itself, but from protecting your attention against your own environment. When you design boundaries that limit access to distraction, you free up energy for the work that actually matters. Boundaries also help you create clear mental transitions. Humans function well when cues are strong and environments are defined. If you work in the same place you relax, your mind blends the two states. You no longer associate that space with focus. But if you create a boundary, maybe it's a separate area, maybe it's a particular setup, maybe it's even a ritual that signals focus begins now. You train your brain to switch into a disciplined mode more easily. Your environment becomes an ally instead of a saboteur. You don't have to push yourself as hard because the space itself tells your mind what to do. Many people think boundaries are restrictions that make life feel rigid, but they're actually the opposite. Boundaries liberate your attention. They reduce internal conflict. They remove the exhausting negotiations you tend to have with yourself. Imagine how much smoother your day feels when you don't have to keep deciding whether to check your phone, or whether you should start working, or whether you should continue or take a break. Boundaries remove that decision-making. You're either inside the boundary or outside it. And when you're inside, you work. When you're outside, you rest. Clear lines eliminate the mental noise that usually drains discipline. One of the biggest benefits of strong boundaries is that they help you manage your impulses gracefully. You don't have to be superhuman to resist temptation, you just have to make temptation inconvenient. If you know social media pulls you away from your goals, delete the apps during work hours. If late-night snacks weaken your health routine, keep them out of the house entirely. If random invitations disrupt your schedule, create a rule that you won't commit to anything without a 24-hour buffer. Small environmental changes remove the triggers that normally lead to impulsive behavior. When the cue disappears, the impulse weakens. And when the impulse weakens, discipline grows naturally. Boundaries also protect your time. Without boundaries, everyone else's priorities will fill your day before your own do. Messages, requests, favors, obligations, they spread to fill any available space. But when you set clear blocks of uninterrupted time, people learn to respect them. You learn to respect them. Discipline becomes much easier when you guard the hours that matter most. You stop letting your attention be stolen in little pieces throughout the day. You reclaim ownership over your schedule. And with that ownership comes consistency. Designing boundaries isn't about being strict for the sake of strictness. It's about building an environment where your goals are supported instead of sabotaged. It's about recognizing that even the strongest intentions can be undone by a weak environment. When you make distractions difficult to access and focus easy to stop, you give yourself the best possible chance to follow through. Discipline stops depending on effort and starts depending on structure, and with the right boundaries in place, staying committed becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural way of moving through your day. One of the biggest misunderstandings about discipline is the belief that it's about being perfect, never slipping, never getting distracted, never losing momentum. But real discipline is built on something far more flexible and far more human, the ability to reset quickly. Even the most disciplined people in the world make mistakes. They procrastinate. They get overwhelmed. They have days where nothing goes according to plan. The difference is not that they avoid failure. It's that they recover from it almost immediately. They don't wait for the stars to align again. They don't wait for Monday. They don't wait for motivation to return. They reset the moment they realize they've drifted. And that single habit keeps them consistent over the long run. We tend to think that one mistake ruins everything. You miss a workout, and suddenly you tell yourself the whole week is ruined. You don't study for a day and convince yourself you've already fallen behind. You break a diet and decide you'll start again next month. This kind of thinking destroys discipline, not because the mistake was big, but because the reaction to the mistake was catastrophic. A small slip turns into a spiral simply because we refuse to reset quickly. The longer you wait to reset, the heavier the guilt becomes. And the heavier the guilt becomes, the harder it feels to start again. But when you treat mistakes as normal, temporary, and solvable within minutes, not weeks, the emotional weight disappears. Resetting quickly teaches you to detach your identity from your slip-ups. Instead of labeling yourself as inconsistent or weak, you learn to see mistakes as part of the process. You stop beating yourself up and start correcting course. That shift allows you to maintain momentum even when things don't go perfectly. The truth is, consistency isn't about never breaking the chain. It's about reconnecting the chain immediately after it breaks. When you reset quickly, you prevent a one-day mistake from becoming a one-week setback. You protect your progress by refusing to let small failures grow into big ones. Another powerful thing about resetting is that it helps you understand how momentum really works. Momentum isn't built by being perfect every day, built by reducing the downtime between productive days. When you shorten the gap between the moment you slip and the moment you start again, You strengthen your discipline far more than someone who tries to be flawless. The shorter the gap, the stronger the habit becomes. It's like keeping a wheel spinning. It doesn't matter if it slows a little. What matters is that you don't let it come to a complete stop. A quick reset gives the wheel another push before it loses all its motion. Resetting also trains you to think in terms of actions instead of emotions. When you procrastinate, your first reaction is usually emotional. You feel disappointed, frustrated, guilty. If you dwell on those emotions, you delay the reset. But if you focus on the action, even a small one, you interrupt the emotional spiral. A single small action, opening the book, writing one sentence, doing a 5-minute workout, snaps your brain out of the slump. It reminds your mind that progress is always just one small step away, and not some massive comeback effort you need to prepare for. Quick resets shrink the gap between intention and action, making discipline less dramatic and more practical. Another benefit of quick resets is that they neutralize perfectionism. Perfectionists struggle with discipline the most because they believe that if something isn't done flawlessly, it isn't worth doing at all. That mindset creates paralysis. But when you embrace the philosophy of quick resets, perfectionism loses its power over you. The goal becomes continuity, not perfection. You stop aiming for flawless streaks and start aiming for frequent restarts. That approach turns discipline into a lifelong rhythm instead of a fragile routine that collapses the moment something goes wrong. What makes quick resets so effective is that anyone can do them anytime with no preparation. You don't need a mood shift, a surge of motivation, or a grand plan. You just need a moment of awareness followed by a simple decision. Start again. That's it. The reset is small, but the impact compounds over time. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you adaptability. It teaches you that progress is always available to you, no matter how many times you drift. In the end, the strength of your discipline is not measured by how perfectly you perform, but by how quickly you return after you slip. Resetting quickly turns setbacks into brief pauses instead of long detours. It keeps you in the game. It protects your long-term consistency. And most importantly, it teaches you that progress isn't about flawless execution. It's about refusing to quit, no matter how many times you have to begin again. I used to believe that discipline was a straight line, that success required flawless execution, day after day, but what actually made the difference was how quickly I could get back on the line when I strayed, and that ability to reset instantly changed everything for me. Because life isn't a perfect sequence of wins, it's a sequence of attempts interrupted by distractions, mistakes, and interruptions. And if you wait to recover, you hand your momentum to inertia and regret instead of taking it back. So I learned to treat a slip not as a moral failure, but as a tiny signal that needed a fast, practical response rather than a long internal debate. When I missed a work session or let curiosity pull me in an unrelated rabbit hole, I didn't narrate a story about failing. I asked one simple question. What one small action gets me moving again right now? That question is the reset button. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, a single sentence written, 5 minutes of focus. Work, opening the file you avoided, a quick phone call, a short walk to clear the head. Those tiny actions break the psychological chain that turns a momentary lapse into a long derailment. The idea is to reduce the time between the mistake and the restart. Because the shorter that gap, the less power the mistake has to change your identity or your day. Habit strength doesn't come from being unbreakable, it comes from being repairable, and building the muscle of quick resets is a practical, repeatable discipline that anyone can train. One technique that helped me was to normalize slips before they happen by planning for them. I would build micro resets into my routine so that when a disruption occurred, I didn't need permission to begin again. My protocol was already there. This could be as simple as a 3-minute rule. If I found myself distracted, I gave myself 3 minutes to do one meaningful action toward the task I'd abandoned. That tiny commitment lowered the activation energy and often turned into a full session. Another trick was to keep a visible list of the smallest possible next steps for each project. So when momentum faltered, I didn't have to invent a plan. I could just pick the next micro step. The fewer decisions you must make to restart, the more likely you are to restart quickly. Language matters too, and the words you use about slips change how you respond. Instead of saying, I failed, say, I paused. Instead of, I broke my streak, say, I'll resume now. Those small reframes stop shame from ballooning into avoidance. Shame makes the reset feel heavy and distant. Curiosity and fear make it feel complicated. but a neutral, action-oriented phrase. Makes the reset feel small and doable. You're not repairing a moral breach. You're performing a tiny technical correction. Another practical element is metrics and short feedback loops when you track a behavior and see a missing data point. You don't have to wait to guess whether it mattered. The missing point is immediate feedback, and that clarity encouraged a swift restart, accountability partners, or simple public commitment. Shorten the reset time because you don't want to update someone that you never tried again. Social friction can be useful in prompting a quick restart. When your own internal alarm is slow, and at Renaissance, we always favor short feedback loops because they produce faster learning and faster corrections. The ability to reset quickly also protects against perfectionism and all-or-nothing thinking. Perfectionists often avoid restarts because restarting implies imperfection. But if the culture you build around yourself expects restarts, if your own rules welcome them, then imperfection become data, not doom, and that mindset reduces the paralysis that so often follows a slip. Practically, this looks like scheduling deliberate recovery moment. At the end of each work block, I might spend 2 minutes noting what went well and what needs a quick fix, that tiny ritual turn. Small failures into immediate tasks instead of festering regrets. Finally, remember that resetting quickly compounds quietly. Every small restart rebuilds momentum and identity, and after enough reset, you're no longer someone who used to be disciplined. You're someone who consistently returns. The habit of quick restart is a resilience engine that turns setbacks into acceleration rather than anchors. And learning to treat discipline as a series of rapid recoveries rather than a parade of flawless days is one of the simplest, most powerful shifts you can make. Most people grow up believing that greatness is something mysterious, something reserved for a few gifted minds who were born with extraordinary talent. They imagine brilliance as a spark, a lightning strike, an exceptional moment of insight. But what I learned over many decades is that brilliance alone is unreliable. It shows up when it wants to. It comes in flashes, it fades quickly, and it can't be summoned on demand. Consistency, on the other hand, is steady, predictable, and far more powerful than people realize. When you learn to love consistency more than the dramatic bursts of brilliance, you begin to understand how extraordinary results are really built. It's the quiet, ordinary repetition, the things you do every day, especially when nobody is watching, that compound into something remarkable over time. There's something almost deceptive about consistency because it doesn't feel impressive in the moment. Doing 1 extra hour work, reading a few more pages, refining your ideas, showing up to your routine even when you're tired, they all feel small and unimportant. People ignore these tiny actions because they don't produce immediate excitement. Brilliance feels thrilling. Consistency feels plain. But what most people don't realize is that brilliance depends on the foundation consistency builds. Without a rhythm, without constant effort, without the daily practice of sharpening your mind and your skills, brilliant moments either don't appear or don't matter. Consistency lays the groundwork that brilliance needs in order to grow into something meaningful. Consistency is also what keeps you moving forward when inspiration disappears. Anyone can be motivated for a week. Anyone can be enthusiastic for a moment. But motivation fades, inspiration is inconsistent, and brilliant ideas often arrive at inconvenient times. Discipline steps in when brilliance steps out. The person who loves consistency doesn't wait for the perfect mood, doesn't wait to feel clever, doesn't wait for some sudden spark. They just show up. They take the next step. They repeat the basics. And because they repeat them so many times, they eventually become exceptional at the very things other people quit halfway through. This is where the gap between ordinary and extraordinary forms not in talent, but in endurance. Over the years, I watched how small, consistent improvements produce massive effects. In research, we didn't rely on brilliant guesses. We relied on running tests daily, refining data, checking errors, doing the boring work over and over until patterns revealed themselves. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. Extraordinary breakthroughs were always the product of countless ordinary steps. That's what most people overlook. They want the breakthrough without the repetition that makes breakthrough possible. Consistency accumulates, it compounds. It multiplies in the background while you're not paying attention. And then one day, you look back and realize how far you've come simply because you didn't stop. Loving consistency means embracing the process rather than chasing the thrill. It means valuing progress even when it's slow, believing that the line will eventually curve upward if you keep moving. It means trusting the math of repetition. When you repeat a small action thousands of times, the results can't help but become extraordinary. It means understanding that the real advantage isn't intensity but reliability. Anyone can work hard occasionally, but the person who works steadily, faithfully, and patiently builds a level of skill and momentum that intensity alone can never match. When you shift your mindset from seeking brilliance to sustaining consistency, everything changes. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop worrying about whether you're talented enough. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You start focusing on the one thing you can control and every single day showing up. And when you show up day after day, even with small steps, those steps stack into something extraordinary. Extraordinary results in the end are just ordinary actions repeated for an unusually long time. I used to believe discipline was simply a matter of will and intention. But over the years, I learned that environment shapes behavior far more reliably than the best intentions ever do. The chair you sit in, the arrangement of your desk, the apps on your phone, and the routines you accept all push you toward certain actions. If you want lasting change, start by changing the place and systems that surround your work. Environment does not just influence behavior, it quietly directs it. Small adjustments in a space compound into significant differences in what you actually accomplish. When my workspace was cluttered and my tools were scattered, decisions multiplied and attention fractured. Once I cleared the desk, removed unrelated objects, and created a dedicated area for focused work, beginning became easier. The room itself signaled that it was time to concentrate. In that clarity, I wasted far less energy on trivial choices and had more available for meaningful effort. Designing boundaries is critical to protecting your environment. Boundaries can be physical, like keeping your phone in another room during work block, using headphones to cut noise, or reserving a specific chair for deep thinking. They can also be procedural, such as fixed meeting times, required agendas, shorter gatherings, and predictable response windows so your inbox does not dictate your day. These modest rules add up to powerful defenses against the slow erosion of attention. Automation removes needless temptation by preventing decisions from arising in the first place. Turn off notifications, use website blockers during focused periods, automate bill payments, and simplify choices that do not require creativity. Every action you remove from the decision queue preserves willpower for tasks that truly need deliberate thought. Automation is the strategic delegation of routine friction to systems that will operate even when your energy is low. Select tools that reinforce the behavior you want. Tools should hide your weaknesses and amplify your strengths. If you are prone to endless scrolling, arrange your phone so that social apps are less accessible and productivity apps are more visible. If you feel overwhelmed by projects, use a management system that surfaces the next smallest step instead of a sprawling backlog. The right tools reduce cognitive load and make consistent performance the path of least resistance. Physical comfort matters as well. Poor lighting, an uncomfortable chair, or an awkward monitor position create tiny resistances that add up into avoidance and excuses. Address those mundane issues, and you will remove reasons to disengage. Discipline functions best when your body is not fighting the environment at the same time your mind is attempting sustained focus. Finally, your social environment plays a considerable role. The people around you establish norms that shape expectations and behavior. Surround yourself with those who respect your time and boundaries, and you will find it easier to protect the hours that matter. If your circle rewards immediacy and constant availability, it will be harder to cultivate deep work. Set simple norms about availability and communication, and others will adapt, making the disciplined path the default. Over time, a protected environment becomes a statement of identity when the spaces, systems, and people around you consistently nudge you toward the habits you desire. Showing up becomes automatic rather than heroic. Protecting and optimizing your environment is not a one-time act. It is an ongoing investment in who you want to be. Regularly review and adjust your surroundings so they continue to reinforce progress and sustain the habits that lead to long-term results. Make your environment work for you, and discipline will feel more natural than it seemed before. Most people treat discipline like a sprint. They push hard for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then wonder why they burn out. lose motivation, or slip back into old habits. They believe discipline is about intensity, about giving everything you have in a short burst, about proving something to yourself through sheer force. But real discipline doesn't operate that way. It isn't loud or dramatic. It isn't fueled by adrenaline or excitement. True discipline is a rhythm you settle onto, a long-term, steady pattern that you can maintain even on the days when you feel tired, uninspired, or uncertain. When you stop expecting discipline to be a temporary surge of effort and start treating it as a sustainable rhythm, everything in your life becomes more stable, more predictable, and more aligned with what you're trying to build. A rhythm is something you return to again and again. It withstands emotional highs and lows. It's flexible enough to survive bad days and strong enough to pull you forward even when life gets messy. When you build discipline as a rhythm, you stop depending on motivation. You stop chasing perfect conditions. You stop waiting for the energy or inspiration to arrive. Instead, you rely on the momentum of your routine. You know what time you start, what work you do, how you move through your tasks, and how you recover. This consistency protects you from the chaos of your own moods. What people often forget is that intense bursts of effort are expensive. They drain emotional reserves. They create unrealistic expectations. They set you up for disappointment when you inevitably can't maintain that level of pressure. A rhythm, by contrast, is built intentionally so it doesn't deplete you. It gives you the space to breathe, the ability to adjust, and the resilience to keep going. A surge may feel powerful in the moment, but a rhythm is what carries you over months and years. That's where meaningful achievements come from, not from 3 heroic weeks of discipline, but from steady behavior repeated long enough to reshape your identity. Thinking in rhythm also teaches patience. When you adopt a long-term perspective, you stop rushing results. You focus on making today slightly better than yesterday. You stop comparing your progress to others, because rhythms grow uniquely for each person. You also stop punishing yourself for setbacks. A rhythm isn't destroyed by one missed day or one mistake. You simply return to the beat. This approach removes the guilt and self-criticism that often lead people to give up entirely. Instead of seeing discipline as something fragile, you start seeing it as something durable, something that bends without breaking. The beauty of rhythm is that it encourages gradual growth. Small improvements accumulate quietly in the background. You don't need dramatic leaps to transform your life. You just need to stay in motion. The compounding effect of showing up consistently is far more powerful than any single burst of energy. Whether it's learning, health, creativity, or work, the people who win are rarely the ones who sprint. They're the ones who learn how to pace themselves. They conserve energy where it doesn't matter, so they can apply steady pressure where it does. Treating discipline as rhythm also gives you control over your future. When your habits are predictable, your outcomes become more predictable. When you show up daily, even in small ways, you build trust with yourself. You know you can rely on your own patterns. You know your system will catch you if you stumble. This creates a level of internal confidence that temporary intensity can never produce. Intensity proves you can act. Rhythm proves you can endure. If you want discipline to last, make it gentle enough to repeat and strong enough to guide you. Make it a pattern, not a performance. Make it something you return to, not something you fight against. Let it become the background beat of your life, steady and dependable, shaping your actions quietly but powerfully over time. When discipline becomes rhythm, you no longer battle yourself every day. You simply show up and follow the beat you created, and that rhythm carries you farther than any temporary surge of effort ever could.